The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello and welcome to the Rise of the Phoenix edition, Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger. I'm here with my co-host and my son, Wyatt Unger. And I'm also here with a gazillion time returning guest, Dan Zimborski. Dan, welcome, and thanks for coming on.
Hey guys, how's it going today?
It's going well. It's going well. It looks like we have a real baseball season going. So
it's nice. It's nice to have a real baseball season going.
It is. It's I wasn't sure how I felt about no fans in the seats last year. But now that I see fans in the seats, big difference, and I think it's a big difference for the players as well.
It was a lot of fun, at least without the fans, hearing the players curse. Giancarlo Stanton had one of the loudest F-bombs I ever heard during a baseball game last year.
This is true. This is true. You did hear everything, and people didn't even need to be mic'd up. So, I'd written down a few reminders of questions. So I'm actually going to go to number 2 reminder first. Okay. So 2020. For those who don't know, Dan is well known for his ZiPS projection system. And so how much havoc did 2020 play on your ZiPS, so to speak?
Quite a lot, actually. People are always like, so what did you do to compensate for the short 2020? And I'm like, well, you can't really compensate for data that you don't have. The projections are just going to be worse this year, and everybody's projections are going to be worse this year. Even people who are, predicting the future without projections, their predictions are going to be worse this year because we have so much uncertainty. It was an unprecedented season in baseball history. We've had shortened seasons before. The most were 1981 and 1994 for player strike reasons, which are different than a pandemic. You had World War II, but the game still went on. But this was it was unprecedented. So it's hard to draw conclusions, and I think we're seeing some of that. For instance, pitcher injury rates. We don't know what's going on, and baseball has kind of added a new wrench into the works by adding in the mid-season enforcement of sticky things on baseballs. So this is not a great time for a prognosticator.
Okay. So, while we're on that, so you remember a few years ago, Wyatt, who was the player, the outfielder, I believe he was with the White Sox at the time, and I remember you told me he was going to drop like a rock. So I always ask you, who's going to drop like a rock? But Wyatt, do you remember who the outfielder was?
I believe it was Avisail Garcia.
Avisail Garcia. So, yes. So we're going back a few years, and he dropped a little, not like a rock. So I'm just curious. Anybody we're seeing now, even with the difficulty in projecting, that you expect to drop like a rock?
Well, if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said you mean Mercedes. Even as cool a story as he's been, it was hard to expect him to continue to do just what he did earlier this year. So it kind of ruined the story. I think Cedric Mullins is going to drop off. I think the power's for real, but I don't think he's going to hit 310. Who else? I guess Gregorius' batting average is probably slightly high from his peripheral stats. Carlos Correa is always an injury risk. I think those are some of the bigger names when we look at the batters. when we look at pitchers, well, I guess at first it's kind of mean, but I don't think Jacob deGrom's going to end up with an ERA of 0.50 or anything. He'll slump and have an ERA of 1 something, but that does count as falling off, I think. Let me think. Who else? Probably, I think Stroman's probably a little over his head. Zach Davies, maybe even Danny Duffy and Dallas Keuchel. It's an inexact science, unfortunately. So there's a lot of guesswork.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Mullins, and Wyatt can back me up on this. I liked Mullins a couple of years ago. I said, yeah, I like this guy. And again, it's so. I mean, that's why I kind of like. A combination of statistics and the eyeball. That's just me.
Well, I mean, I like Mullins too. I just don't like him 900 OPS much. And I'm from Baltimore, so I have a reason to be biased in his favor.
Yes, and you probably watch him more than I do, because I got to admit, we have the MLB subscription, so I have to admit, anytime Baltimore is the opponent, it's not usually my first choice of game to pick.
That's fine. It should be. It's not the most exciting team.
No, but every team has players I like to watch. I'll tell you who's one of my favorite Orioles to watch. Certainly not a superstar. Is DJ Stewart. He does like to work the count. He's got a good arm. He sometimes makes some bonehead throws, but he's got a good arm. I can't describe what it is. I'm not proclaiming him, he's a totally unrated player. No, he's just, for me personally, I just kind of like an interesting player for me to watch. So maybe something like a guy back in the 60s who I used to like to watch on the Indians, although back then it was only when the Yankees played the Indians, was a guy named Willie Kirkland. So it's just one of those things. So,
yeah, and people sometimes forget that when they're analyzing things. See, I'm paid to be an analyst, but I enjoy things too. And you can't argue with aesthetics. And Kirkland had a good run as a young player. He wasn't as good after leaving the Giants. But I like fun players. I like knuckleball pitchers like Tim Wakefield, and we don't have enough knuckleball pitchers anymore. I want to see Brent Honeywell be able to throw this screwball in the majors, because we don't get screwballs very much anymore. I think Sid Fernandez was the last true screwball, unless I'm forgetting someone.
Fernandez was...
Not Sid Fernandez. No, Fernando. What am I thinking?
Fernando. Okay.
Some brain fart.
I was about to say...
I don't know why I said Sid Fernandez.
Sid Fernandez, he used to throw up in the zone. He was the guy, if you wanted to give yourself a reasonably decent chance of catching a foul ball, you would try to get a seat in the mezzanine section behind home plate. Okay? Sid Fernandez was like constant, pop up behind the screen. Constant. But, yes, and Mike Cuellar was, when I was younger, Mike Cuellar was a screwball guy who I enjoyed watching. And again, Baltimore, there you go. So you should have some familiarity with him. But yeah,
and I do remember El Cid too, because El Cid was with Baltimore too. And it was fun because in the 80s, when Sid Fernandez was on the mound, they weren't afraid, to play Kevin Mitchell at shortstop, which is really funny to think about now.
I know.
Howard Johnson, too.
Oh, yes. Yep. I mean, when you think about a lot of conversions, or actually a lot of guys who came up in certain positions, and it's like, what were people thinking? Kind of like almost how I always say that the Yankees. Even though, listen, I know analytics bear him out better, and I'm a fan of him. But I think the Yankees blew it by not making Gary Sanchez a first baseman. He's just the position, I think, mentally overwhelms him.
Well, he's actually having a pretty good year this year.
He is. No, I'm like I said, I'm not one of these people who is down on him. Okay, and Wyatt can back me up on that. But what I'm saying is, I just think years ago they should have recognized. I think he would have had a much more consistent offensive career had they just gone with that, and made him a first baseman. I think it just, like I said, I think catching mentally overwhelms him, and it affects every part of his game. So hopefully he's gotten past that this year. So tell me, all right, let me ask you something. Did you see Jesse Winker coming?
I thought he'd be good. I didn't think he would be this good. And, I mean, there's always that chance that anyone's going to be that good. But I didn't really see, an OPS around 1,000 coming. I didn't see him hitting 330. I do think the batting average will come down, but the power is for real. And it's nice that the team just stopped messing around and just played him, because they have been jerking him around quite a bit since calling him up. Every year it seemed they had another outfielder blocking him. And a couple years ago, when they were starting the season, having him split time with Matt Kemp, I think it hurt his development, but he's kind of taking over the centerpiece of the offense job from Joey Votto, because, Votto's 37 now, 38, somewhere around there, but he's not the player he used to be. He's been on the decline, and the Reds need it. They lost a good chunk of their pitching value when they lost Bauer in the offseason. Luis Castillo hasn't been very good. So they need that offense to turn it around, because in recent years the Reds offense has not been very good. They were 13th in the NL in runs scored in 2020, and that's in a poor pitcher's park. So this increased offense is keeping the Reds relevant this year.
And now, a guy who seems to have seems to have come down off of his promise, Matt Chapman. What do you make of him?
It's tricky. Chapman, his bat has not been the same for over a year. He's still a tremendous defensive third baseman. So he's still, a player who has value, but back in, 2018 to 2019, he was a legitimate MVP candidate. Obviously, behind the leaders, but someone who you could have in your top 10 and not look crazy. This year, I mean, the power is still there, but it's spotty. His contact rate's been down. I don't know the magic elixir to fix his offense, and I still think he's a good player. But I do think that the A's have to kind of take him down a peg in their evaluations of him long term.
Yes. Wyatt, you got anything?
So one thing, I sort of familiarized myself with what to look at for like a couple seasons. But Dan, what do you look at to determine how good a player is over a long period of time?
Well, that's a very loaded question. The way the projections do it is they establish a baseline based on recent seasons and weighting it, and they adjust based on some things that I guess peripheral stats, StatCast data, some basic things like batting average on balls in play, because that's a very volatile stat when you talk a year or two, even for hitters where it's more predictive than it is for pitchers. Really, it's just about doing it in a systematic, objective way and doing it consistently from player to player. And one thing about predicting the future is you have to really get used to being wrong, because even with good tools, we don't have crystal balls. We're just kind of peering through the fog a little bit, and that's kind of the best anyone can do. But there are a lot of ways to come to the same result, I guess, is what I'm saying.
And, it's funny because a few weeks ago, Wyatt, was showing me he put the spreadsheet together, and and he started. When did you start? You started with 2018.
Yeah, but at this point, I'm not looking at it really.
Okay, so yeah, he had done 2018, 19, 20, and he was starting 21, and he was weighting the seasons. So it's funny how he went and put that together on his own, and that's kind of, the baseline of part of the baseline for your system. So I guess
it's the foundation really of for any good projection system. That is the place to start, because while the basic stats don't tell us everything, they do tell us a lot of things. And when establishing a baseline, that's really the approach that works the best. Tom Tango's Marcel, which is designed just to be a basic projection system, that's what it is at its core, and that's a good place to kind of grow any kind of projection or estimate from.
So now, while we're talking about zips and you're talking about other systems. Now there may be some people out there who are like, like zips, analytics, like right away they get lost. Okay, so that Progressive commercial that says we're trying to help you not turn into your parents.
I think I do.
Okay, so
I'm doing it right now.
Let's just say you are, you want to help somebody like not turn into their, to their parents when they're looking at baseball stats. Where would you start on a simple level? And I think you gotta watch that commercial. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah,
and,
I remember it now. Yeah, I've been YouTubing it while you asked the question. I think really the best place to start is really just to discover things on your own. The basis of any like sabermetrics or analytics is just asking a question and then figuring out the answer to the question. That's basically how a lot of these things are solved. Like when you talk about batting average on balls in play, it was just Vorush McCracken, a semi-employed bike courier, just asking to himself, does batting average in balls in play, is that a repeatable skill year by year? And then he figured out how to examine it, and he found out that largely it's quite volatile. It does have some ability in there, but it's not like, a player strikeout rate or anything. And really, I mean, a lot of analysts aren't people, that were trained like in mathematical techniques. They were people who just simply ask questions. Bill James, when he started writing about baseball, was a night watchman, I believe. Rob Nair, before he became James's research assistant and then worked for ESPN, he was roofing full time after dropping out of college. So really, the question is, if this is a passion, you just want to just ask questions and examine the questions, because that's really the basis of all learning. I was talking to some students at Miami University, the Ohio Miami University, last week. They have a sports analytics major, and they're going to be offering the country's first master's in sports analytics. And that's pretty much what I told them. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Just you see something, you're curious, just examine it, just explore it on your own, and you'll be surprised sometimes the answers you find for yourself.
That's good advice. That's good advice. So tell me, a lot of people. How can I say it? A lot of people use you, depend on you for their fantasy teams. Who's hot, who's not. And again, they depend on the projections. But I from what I understand, sometimes you receive some nasty messages.
Yeah, I got a lot of nasty messages.
Can you share some of the funniest, and some of that are funny and nasty at the same time, and you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about age ratings here.
Well, that's good. Well, just while I'm opening it, I just got a Facebook. In Facebook Messenger, I just got a message from a stranger this morning that all it says is asshole. And I'm like, oh, thanks. So here's one. It's the email is titled "Your Article" with a "your" spelled like the contraction. I read your article and it's sick how you excuse Melky Cabrera. He cheated and has a big needle in his ass like your hero, also spelled with an apostrophe, Barry Bonds. Roger Marist is rolling over in his grave. You should quit being a writer and kill yourself. Let's see. Hold on. I'm trying to find the ones that are shorter. Some of them are very long.
I'll take long if it's funny.
Have you checked the Phillies' record since benching Ryan Howard? All your fancy masturbation stats like VORP and WAR and FART said that the Phillies would win a lot more games without him. But guess what they've been losing? Without Howard's leadership, the Phillies stopped winning, and your calculator can't tell you that. You actually think Prince Fielder, that's how it's spelled, is overrated. It's spelled like that. That is hilarious. Andrus Q. Beltre equals 150 RBI. Bank it. Fielder is going to be in great shape in July. He's been playing in Detroit and Milwaukee with all the fat Polacks like you eating sausage. But in Texas heat, he's going to be a lean, mean win machine and a hero to the 2014 World Championship Texas Rangers. You're not funny. You're not smart. Your facade is broken, and facade is spelled F-A-S-S-A-D.
Oh, man.
And I'll do one more, and it's not that it's mean, it's that it's just unhelpful because the person doesn't seem to know what I do. Where did that go? Dan, the Zips projections you post, especially team standings, seem to be very different from the ones at Fangraphs. I suggest you be more careful about accurately using Fangraphs Zips projections. You also never credit them for the projections you get from them, which I believe is irresponsible. Now, the problem with that, of course, is I run the Zips projections, so I don't have to quote who I'm taking them from, because they're from myself. But there's a lot of them. I like to keep them, and I like to tell them to my mom, because my mom gets upset that people hate me on the internet sometimes, and I love teasing her about that.
I think there's a book there. Or at least a long story.
By the way, those 2014 World Champion Texas Rangers finished 31 games out of first place and had the fourth worst record in the major leagues.
And Prince Fielder was not good. He did not get those 150 RBI that I was supposed to bank on. I'm shocked. He got That was the year he was injured too, wasn't it? He probably got like
that was the
20 or something.
That was the beginning of the end for him. Yes.
Oh, here's one. Here's one from Twitter. Knock knock. Who's there? You suck. Go Astros.
Speaking of the Astros, are they a surprise to you?
Not completely. I projected them to win in the upper 80s wins and be close to Oakland. Now they're playing better than that, and that's largely because they've been able to cobble together a surprisingly good pitching staff. I always thought the offense would be good because they have most of the guys who made that offense good. They still have Altuve, Correa, Bregman. They have Kyle Tucker for full time. They still have Brantley. Jordan Alvarez was coming back. They had most of those guys except for George Springer. But I was concerned about about the rotation behind Zach Greinke. But it's been really good, and that's been enough to keep them competitive. They still need another bullpen arm, I think. Raley hasn't been good. They've had some injuries. They could use another arm there, but they're likely to make the playoffs this year, and I think even though they should have gotten a lot of heat for the sign-stealing stuff, I think that people will probably rag on them a little less since they're actually winning without presumably any sign-stealing. But I guess they thrive a little on being hated, and that's fine. It works in wrestling.
Yeah. I didn't think they would suck. I didn't think they'd be under 500, but yeah, obviously they're doing better than I expected. And I think they're enough under the cap where they can actually go out and improve their bullpen if they're inclined to do so. And if they do that, I think their brand of baseball is well suited for the postseason. I've been telling people for years, you can slug your way to the postseason, but very few teams slug their way to a championship. And the Yankees, my Yankees are a perfect example, and and that's why they've been struggling, in the postseason all these years. You're up against better competition, particularly better pitching, and you have to find another way to create your runs.
I think with the Astros, I think they should actually be considering going over the luxury tax threshold this year, simply because it's still a team that does seem to have an expiration date, because they have Greinke's a free agent this year, Carlos Correa is a free agent this year, Michael Brantley's a free agent next year. They're going to start losing a lot of their big offensive pieces, and they've really only been able to replace one with Kyle Tucker. So I think they should be aggressive, since either this year or maybe next year might kind of be the last gasp of this particular Astros core.
Yeah, but they're well under. I think they're like a good $20 million under. Yeah, but remember that. Remember their payroll is like $189 now, but the luxury tax threshold also includes player benefits, and that's about $15-16 million for a roster. So they are actually pretty close to the payroll, but there are creative ways to do that. You can take a bad contract in future years, and they do have the flexibility to do that, because Justin Verlander is a free agent, so they'll have 33 off the books for 2022 already. So that's a plus there. And they could probably bring Zach Greinke back for less than 35. I don't think he's going to get $35 million at going into his at 38. So they have some flexibility, but they'll have to be creative. But teams have shown an ability to be creative when they need to be with manipulating the cap. Because, I just opened up our estimated payroll, and their luxury tax threshold right now, including arbitration salaries,
looks for next year already looks to be about 120, 130. So they do have the ability to play a little accounting games with making additions to the roster.
Because if they go over this year and they stay under next year, they're fine, pretty much. It kind of resets, and also I believe they lost draft picks as well. So how much harder can you hit them?
They lost their first and second draft picks, I believe.
Yeah,
was it first and second? I'm trying to remember.
I think it was, and I think it might have been for 2 years. I'm not positive though.
Yeah, for 2 years. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was first and second or third, but yeah, first and second. I think for the 2 years for the 2020 and 2021 draft, and that's also gonna not destroy their ability to kind of rebuild without doing a full rebuild, because I mean draft picks in baseball aren't like draft picks in football. You draft a lot of guys and a lot of them will bust even more than in other leagues. But they, as I said, I think their window is closing a bit.
Yeah. Wyatt, you got anything else?
I think additionally on the Astros thing, I saw a lot of people saying they were going to have about 85. That was sort of the number, 85, and finish second or third. 85 wins, finish second or third in the division. I kind of laughed at that. I had them running away with first place, and I had them winning the AL pennant. So I'm really glad to see that I've kind of been on the money with that one, because what I saw in their offense is that Altuve, Bregman, Gurriel, I didn't expect those guys. I mean, Bregman didn't have a bad season last year, but we all know that he's not a 120 WRC plus hitter, and you can't expect Altuve and Gurriel with their pedigree to once again finish with a below average hitting season, 162 game season. So the thing is, for me, they have 7 hitters who don't strike out, who don't rely on the long ball, who are all-star level talent. You can't pitch around anybody. Yesterday, Altuve was getting the night off. Bregman was out with an injury, and they put 12 runs up on the board. So the pitching, they have money to go get somebody. They're probably going to need to. They've had some surprises with Luis Garcia, but I still think they might need to get another person. And that person could be Justin Verlander. Who knows how he's going to pitch, and who knows when he'll be back. But I'm really high on this team.
And hey, they're still paying for Verlander, but no, you're definitely looking. Your projection is definitely looking good here, because they can go 500 the rest of the way and win 90 games. So and they weren't a popular pick. Like if you go back to I'm trying to remember what our Fangraph staff picks. I think we're really down on the A's, which has not really worked out this year. I think generally our staff like the Angels more than the A's, which is not looking too good right now. But as I say, the future is very uncertain. So it's certainly, I'm sure Astros fans kind of feel really good about this team, because it's been kind of a controversial 18 months for them.
So speaking of surprise teams, what about San Francisco?
I thought their pitching would be good. I didn't think it would be this good. I've been a fan of Gausman for a long time. I always thought maybe he needed to develop a third pitch, because he's a very fastball splitter guy. But he's using his actually I read a piece about this a few weeks ago. He's using his splitter almost like a breaking pitch now, using it kind of low and outside against righties, the way he used to try to use his kind of mediocre breaking stuff. I'm not convinced they're this good, but the thing about the Giants is those wins are on the scoreboard, and the Cards have no memory. So, like the Astros, the Giants can play 500 ball the rest of the way and still win the second wild card. That's not great news for NL East teams. I actually have the projections that most of the time now, both wild cards come from the NL West. So that leaves, the NL East and the NL Central teams in a position where they might have to win the division to have a realistic chance at the playoffs. So even if I don't think they're good, they have played good ball. I mean, Buster Posey's playing like it's 2014 again. Brandon Crawford's been terrific. It's a fun team.
Yep. And going back to my Yankees, did you predict them to be a postseason team at the beginning of the year?
I did. I predicted them to win the AL East.
Okay. No, I mean, I thought
I could pull up
they
the
would
odds.
too.
Let me see. I thought, it isn't, as I said at the time, it was a team that had some downside. Now, the downside hasn't been quite what I expected. I thought that, after Garrett Cole, there are a lot of guys with a long injury history. And, you flip the coin wrong a few times, you lose a bunch of those guys, and things can unravel pretty quickly. It hasn't quite been the problem. It's kind of been different things, which has surprised me a little bit. I didn't expect the team to be 12th in runs scored, which was kind of a surprise. But I do think that fundamentally they're probably the best team in the AL East. They do have a case of being the best team in the AL long term if you play the season out a million times. And I know people are down on them, but people tend to panic about things too quickly.
Oh, I listen, I'm a Yankee fan, so I see it amongst my friends, but I'm not panicking. But what I see with them is the hitting philosophy. I think again, it's when they're up against good pitching, they just have no clue how to manufacture a run. I think most teams are guilty of this as well. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I think every batter, I don't care who they are, every batter should shorten up a little bit with two strikes. Because one, at this point, you want to get a base hit. Worst possible thing is, or I should say, your chances are at least getting the bat on the ball a little more, fouling more pitches off, increasing a pitch count, and when a pitcher has to throw more pitches to you, sooner or later that mistake is going to come. I think in general, overall, the hitting philosophy in Major League Baseball is I don't care what the numbers say, what the three predictable outcomes say. I just don't think it's adding up. I think there's, I think it's CPA type analytics. You can make a case for anything, whereas the fundamental actions themselves speak for themselves.
Well, this is something that I've talked about with teams, and I do know how they tried to do it. And one thing that teams have discovered, that mindset was pretty prevalent, but one of the things they discovered is that when you change how a player is comfortable with something, even if it's a better general strategy, it's really, really hard to do, and they found that it kind of has taken – there's a real opportunity cost to it. That working, it's like the taking the ball the other way in against a shift. Teams tried pretty aggressively to try to get their batters into the mindset, but what they found is that it wasn't really being very successful, and it was taking time away from working on the things that a player was actually good at. So it's one of those things that the way it's kind of sorted out is simply because it's the way the rules are designed right now. I think if you want a different type of baseball game, I think you actually have to look at rule changes and adjustments for that to happen. Because I too would like to see a more ball in play type of game, but the rules as they are right now, just don't really incentivize that kind of thing.
So I'm just curious, would you be in favor of Major League Baseball eliminating the shift?
I'm not sure about that, but that's more a philosophical thing. What I would like to do, and I think they should use the low minors to experiment with rule changes, I think you have to look at things like the mound. I think you have to, this might be considered heresy, but I think you have to look at the base pass. The length between bases also helps determine like what a team is incentivized to do. If you have if you slightly decrease the distance between bases, you suddenly make putting the ball in play a more beneficial strategy. And I think that baseball kind of needs to kind of think about what kind of game, just from a marketing standpoint or a fan interest standpoint, what kind of game do fans would be good for the health of the game long term, and then kind of work towards figuring out how to make that happen. You see this a lot in video games, games that are played competitively, is that the companies that program the games, they change up basic parameters to keep what's referred to as the meta game fresh. They make adjustments to deal with imbalances, and that's of course a little harder to do in a sport like baseball. But I do think that baseball should have an approach where they say, hey, we want to keep the game fresh and interesting and have variety, and they don't always do that. But MLB tends to do a lot of things kind of awkwardly.
Yeah, they're definitely it's a lot of knee-jerk reactions, so to speak. So, do you think we're going to have
like sticky stuff?
Yes. Do you think we're going to have a work stoppage next year?
I think it's a possibility. I don't think it's going to be a long one because both sides have a lot to lose. But there's some really serious issues that
I think we lost you for a second. Dan? Wyatt, do you hear him at all?
Nope.
Okay, let's see if he hangs up or calls. There he is. He's back.
Hey, yeah, I don't know what happened. My Skype just disappeared.
Okay.
Oh, what was the last thing you heard me say?
They have a lot to lose, and it was somewhere right after both sides have a lot to lose. Wyatt, do you remember what it was after that? He's got a much better short-term memory than me.
I know where I am. Both sides have a lot to lose, but I mean, players do have some complaints about things. I think the Chris Bryant situation in Chicago was a big eye-opening situation because the Cubs were playing very, very loose with the rules because the MLB's collective bargaining agreement pretty much says that you can't call. You're not actually supposed to be able to call up and demote players for non-baseball reasons. But the problem, of course, is proving it. And so you have teams making arguments that nobody believes, but nobody can really disprove. Like in the Bryant situation, the Cubs pretty much tried to claim that, we think that Mike Olt is a better player now than Chris Bryant, but Chris Bryant will suddenly be better after 2 weeks of minor league baseball. And no one actually believes that, and nobody expects it to believe it. But, the owner's situation or the owner's position is to say, oh, we'll prove it. I think that created a lot of bad blood between players. But similarly, players have to realize that some of the bad contracts for older players, those aren't coming back either, so they can't really be a place that you start driving salary growth in baseball. I know a lot of players were mad about Adam Jones not getting a contract, but nobody really thought in baseball that that Adam Jones was still a starter, and the offers were commensurate with that. So baseball does have a mess to work out, and hopefully it won't be too bloody.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and part of the problem is also that, you know, players on the early end of their careers, they get shafted. And, you know, I think if the owners, if baseball was to adjust that, and if you're a great player early, get paid early, and just know that when you, don't expect to get paid for the back end when your skills are deteriorating. I mean, because it's going to happen. Otherwise, wait, I need some water. Okay, so otherwise, owners are going to be like, well, we don't want to get stuck on the back end, so we have to make it. We have to make it up on one end. And actually, what's happening now in baseball is the owners are able to stick it to the players early when they can just renew their contracts, and they're smartening up to overpaying the aging player for past production that they're probably not going to equal anymore. So I guess there's got to be some movement there. But I tell you what, I mean, one of the things that I heard from the you heard this from the Boris camp, so to speak, when they didn't bring up Chris Bryant was, well, we're certainly going to remember that when he becomes a free agent, which, I mean, and I understand they kind of, went into a gray area with the collective bargaining agreement, but on a realistic basis, I'm thinking to myself, had they started let him hit free agency 1 year early, was he really going to say, hey, listen, you know what? You allowed me to hit free agency a year early. That's like an extra $20 million or more in my pocket. I'm going to give you guys a multi-million-dollar discount. That wasn't going to happen either. So,
no, it wasn't going to happen either. But it's one of those situations where you can't really make a player love you, but you can make a player hate you.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, like, I would have been like, you know what? On paper, everything points to him being ready, but we don't want to put the pressure of him opening the season with us. I mean, and like I say, it just would have been the way I would have spun it. I'm not saying this is the reality. This is how I would have spun it. I would have said, you know what, we're going to let him just go down to AAA for 2 or 3 weeks and let him, let's come out roaring without the pressure of opening the season and people expecting him to be the savior from day one. I just would have spun it a little differently. But
it would have been hard to spin because in the end, everybody would know what the Cubs have to gain by that, essentially.
Yes. Yes.
The Reds did that with Nick Senzel too. They said that they couldn't call him up at the start of the season because he had to learn to play center field in the minors. And so that was, that wasn't the worst explanation in the world, but he was injured and they called him up after playing like 3 games of center field in the minors. So it's hard to say, hey, so were those 3 games really what taught him how to be a center fielder? It's like, they're not even lying well.
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, you can always spin that and say, well, necessity left us no choice. There's always, in most cases, there's always a spin. There's always a spin. We see it every day. So, anyway, Wyatt, have you got any other questions for Dan?
So as far as, determining if a player will drop off, besides their how the comparison between their weighted on base average and their expected weighted on base average, what would you say is something else people who follow these sort of stats should be looking out for?
Well, the difference in expected stats and actual is a good leading indicator. Age is still very, very significant. And really, you look for things kind of like sometimes you look for a drop-off in the swing speed. Sometimes you'll see like a plate discipline thing that isn't a problem, just taking a negative change that has a longer term to kind of work out. I think for a lot of players, if a lot of aging sluggers, even if they're still playing well, if they start having more trouble with fastballs, that's usually a sign that their swing speed is becoming a problem, even if it's not obvious yet. Because quality players can compensate for a while, but they can't compensate forever, because in the end, nobody beats time. I always say that time is the ultimate badass. You will never beat it.
Do you think pitchers have a better shot of adjusting to their let's just say declining velocity, have a better chance of making an adjustment to extend their careers than hitters do?
I think that's true to a good extent, because it's easier to learn a new pitch than to learn a new style of offense, which I say. I think of Frank Tanana, who pretty much had two careers. I'm sure you remember, Wayne, that he was a flamethrower early, got injured, and then was kind of a junk ball slop tosser for the second half of his career, and was really effective in both roles. And I think it's hard to see a hitter being able to make that kind of transformation. Like, say you have a guy who's super fast and gets injured. Say, I'm trying to think of the best player for this example. Okay,
Byron Buxton.
Yeah, Byron Buxton. Let's say that the injuries wear him down and he can't play defense to the degree he can. He's lost a lot of speed. I mean, he doesn't have bad power now, but imagine if he had to become, a 40 home run slugger to contribute every year. That's a really tall order. Someone who's like a slick defensive shortstop who doesn't have a lot of offensive value, if their defense declines, they can't really compensate by being a better hitter in most cases. So I think that pitchers do have more opportunity to kind of hang around the game past their prime, and that's actually fleshed out quite a bit in some of the data. Largely, hitters' careers follow, that kind of growth and decline curve, while pitchers, it's more an injury thing and kind of a gentle slope. Pitchers, as I usually say, hitters age, but pitchers break. That's the bigger problem for pitchers. So I think that's probably a fair statement that pitchers have the capacity to age better.
So, I mean, off the top of my head, I would think Zach Greinke might be more of a modern day example as well.
Yeah, I really went back far to pick Tanana because I saw him. I'm 43, so I saw him mostly entirely in the slop portion of his career, simply because I wasn't around for that much of the late 70s. But Greinke's another good case. I mean, he was never like a fireballer or anything, but he's adjusted very well to kind of his declining velocity. He's got that 72 mile per hour curve that nobody can hit. Greinke's a pretty good example, I think.
Okay. Well, Dan, we're not going to keep you any longer. You actually gave us like an hour. So
I'm a talkative fellow.
That's good. That's okay, because we're going to have you back. We're going to turn Wyatt into a talkative fellow one day. So, unfortunately, he wasn't exposed to my mother enough. Otherwise, he certainly would have, hopefully he would have inherited that. But, again, we thank you for coming on. And we will get you back again.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks. You have a great day, Dan. Okay, folks, we hope you enjoyed the show. Wyatt, you still with me?
I'm here.
Okay. We will be back next week. We'll definitely nab another interesting guest. And thank you for listening.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.